Prepare for deflation in 2023. This is something that you do not hear most people saying, but as you will see when we look at the numbers and the drivers of inflation and deflation, you will notice there is a high chance that we actually may hit deflation territory in 2023. And I have to be perfectly frank about this up front. I do not think deflation is a bad thing. I think inflation is far worse. I think the deflation that follows inflation is simply a result of the malpractice of money printing. It is the bust that is made inevitable by the boom that was caused by all of the artificial printed money, the low interest rates that were much lower than they would have been in a free market. So I think if we just let things go the way that they would go without any further intervention, we would have deflation that would be the cure for the prior inflation, and then we would have a small amount of very natural and very healthy deflation consistently moving forward. The problem I have with the deflation we're about to see this year is not the deflation itself. It's going to be the Federal Reserve's response to it afterwards. By the way, just in case you are interested and you're going to be in the area, I'm going to be speaking at Jason Hartman's event, the Empowered Investor Live Conference. It's in Scottsdale from January 27th through January 29th. It's going to be a blast, some fantastic speakers there. I'd love to see you there. Get your tickets with the link in the description below. So we're going to look at two main factors today that are communicating potential deflation for the coming year. One of them is the growth rate in the money supply, and the other one is real interest rates. First, take a look with me at this chart. This is from longtermtrends.net. This is the M2 money supply growth versus inflation. The black line that you see here is going to be the growth rate in the money supply as measured by M2. The red line is going to be the inflation rate as measured by CPI. This chart, as you can see, goes back to 1870. So obviously, the further you go back, you're going to have changes in the way things were measured and lower amounts of data to pull from the further you go back. But if we just look at the modern era, the last 50 years with higher amounts of data and consistent monetary systems post 1971, you can see there's a pretty high correlation between the growth in the money supply and the CPI inflation rate. There is a little bit of a lag, but generally what happens is inflation follows the money supply. Now, usually what I show you is this chart, which is on the Federal Reserve's website, the chart of the total money supply as measured by M2. And this gives you an idea of what the total money supply has done over a very long period of time, but it's much easier to see what the growth rate is when you measure the year-over-year change. To do that, you just have to click Edit Graph, come up here, drop down, and click percent change from a year ago. And then suddenly what you're able to see is the change in the money supply year over year. Currently, we are at a negative rate of change for the money supply. That just means that if you look at how much money there is, as measured by M2 right now, there's less money in the system than there was exactly 1 year ago. In the lifetime of this data, that has never been that low before. Obviously, there is this huge spike in the growth rate in the money supply when they printed a few $1 trillion, and then they stopped printing trillions of dollars, so the growth rate of the money supply came down. Here they were still printing some money, so it was still positive, but now for a year now, they have not on net created any new money in the system, again, as measured by M2. You can also add in other series here. So here we're adding in the CPI, so you can see it straight from the Federal Reserve's website, the correlation between the data, the M2 money supply growth, and the inflation rate. You can see the growth in the money supply peaked in February of 2021, and the peak in CPI happened about a year and a half later in June of 2022. Basically, the reason for this correlation is because when you inject a bunch of new money into a system, it will work its way through bidding up prices of goods and services, causing prices to rise. There's more money chasing the same amount of goods and services. If you then stop the increase in the money supply, there's no more mechanism by which prices can continue to go up on average. Now, certainly you can have lower purchases in some areas to allow for higher and higher prices still being purchased in other areas, like you can have On net, people stop purchasing things like luxury items and continuing to purchase things like food and energy at higher and higher prices. Absolutely. But on net, if you have the same amount of money circulating around in the system, you cannot have prices of all things continue to go up. There's just not enough money to continue to support that. And since we've seen this massive drop off in the growth rate of the money supply, and we've already seen the CPI peak, this would indicate that we are about to see a severe drop in CPI. And given the time lag between the money supply growth and the CPI moving, it's very possible that by the end of 2023, we even see deflation just from the money supply growth alone. But that's not the only indicator we're going to be looking at today. The next thing we have to look at is real interest rates. Inflation as of November of 2022 is measuring at 7.1% from the CPI. During the month of November, the 10-year US Treasury's interest rate peaked at 4.2% and bottomed at about 3.5%. This means that your dollars were losing purchasing power at a rate of 7%, and you were gaining interest if you had bought a 10-year treasury, which is similar to, it's kind of like the benchmark interest rate for the yield curve. If you were invested in the 10-year treasury, you were gaining 3.5% on your dollars. So you go from $100 to $103.50, but your purchasing power, what was going to cost you $100 last year, now costs you $107. That means that you were losing in purchasing power. That means interest rates on real terms were negative. Even though you were gaining in the number of dollars you had, how far those dollars went means you were decreasing in your purchasing power. That means you have negative real rates even though you had positive nominal rates. Now, there's a very widespread myth that you need positive real interest rates in order to combat inflation. This is absolutely not the case, but you can see why people would think that's the case. Because if you have negative real rates, that means that you still have some sort of a stimulus effect on the economy where you have the rate of inflation above interest rates. And you'd think that that could never happen in a free market. So the only way that that's there is if interest rates are being held artificially low by something like a central bank. I'm going to show you how that's absolutely not the case, and you can 100% cause inflation to reverse itself and even tip over into deflation with negative real rates. So in order to understand this, I'm going to give you a household example, and then we're going to extrapolate that to the entire economy. Imagine right now, as I tweeted out a few days ago, that your income increases by 10% per year. So last year you made 100 grand, this year you make 110 grand. So in our household example here, that would be like the growth rate of the economy. This is how much income you are gaining every single year. But now look at your debt pile. You have such a large debt pile that just to service your debt, your maintenance on that debt, you have to spend about 50% of your income, half of what you make, and your interest rate on all your debt is only 1%. So whether you got credit cards, mortgage, car loans, all of that, let's say you're just debt up to your eyeballs, maxed out here because interest rates were so low that you're only paying 1% on your debt. So why not load up on debt? You did that so much that every year about half your income, we're just pretending taxes don't exist here. So you make 100 grand, 50 grand of it just goes to servicing your debt, not paying down your principal, just paying the interest, the minimum payments. And then the other 50 grand is there for other spending. Now imagine rates go up to 3%. First, let's just say rates go up to 2%. So that doubles. Now, suddenly on all your debt, that debt service cost doubles because interest rates went from 1% to 2%. So instead of spending half your income on your debt service costs, you're spending 100% of your income on your debt service costs. But this happens over a year and you do increase your income by 10%. So you still have $10,000 left over. So you went from 100 grand to 110 grand for your income. Your debt service costs went from 50 grand to 100 grand. So you still have $10,000 left over, but now most of your income goes to just paying your debt. Now go one more year forward and now rates go up to 3%. You've increased your income from 110 grand now to 121 grand to add that extra 10%, but now your debt service cost is at 150 grand. Suddenly you're insolvent, you're bankrupt, you don't have enough income to cover your debt service cost, you default on everything. All of your income went to pay off as much debt as possible, and that wasn't enough. Everything implodes, just financial calamity. Now, let me ask you a question. In this example, where your income was going up by 10% every year, and your interest rate was going up by 1%, Was there real positive rates or real negative rates? Your interest rate on your debt was deeply negative in real terms. It was far less than the rate at which your income was increasing. But you see here, when we push it to this extreme of an example where you have that much debt at that low of an interest rate, it doesn't matter whether the interest rate is positive or negative in real terms. What matters is how much income is being devoted to debt service costs and how much are those debt service costs going up by in relation to how much your income is growing by. It has absolutely nothing to do whatsoever with whether the interest rates are positive or negative on real terms. And so you say, okay, well, if this is true and that actually does extrapolate to the economy, and obviously the economy is not that over leveraged, it is very over leveraged, but it's not like that where suddenly we're going to be paying all of our income as an entire economy to servicing our debt and still not having enough. Obviously that's not the case, at least not right now. But if this were true, we should be seeing some examples of this in the real economy. And I would point you to the most blatant example of this right now is mortgages. In October of 2022, United States buyers needed to earn $107,000 in order to afford the mortgage payment on a typical home, which was $2,700 just about. That's 45% higher than it was a year before, where you needed to only make $73,000. So mortgage rates went from 3% to 7%. So over that time frame, mortgage rates went from about 3% up to about 7%. So they increased 4%. But because of the size of the debt necessary for just this one type of debt, a mortgage, your income would have needed to go from $73,000 to $107,000, an increase of 45% just to be able to make the exact same purchase. Now, when we put these two things together, that if you want to be able to continue servicing your debt at higher interest rates, you need more and more and more income in order to pay for that when that debt pile is huge. Now, for an economy, more income means more money getting shoved in. But take a look at the money supply. The growth rate is 0. There is no more money getting shoved in. So with debt getting more expensive and no more money getting shoved into the economy, at the very least, within the next 3 months, the inflation rate is going to be at 0. And it's very possible that shortly after that, we tip over into deflation as well. And like I said in the beginning, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. The recession is the cure for the malinvestment. But what I'm scared about is the Federal Reserve's response to that deflation. As always, I really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.